Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the class. So, going forward, each group is going to have different topics. And so, what I'm going to try to do each week is to give you a brief summary of the discussion that happened in each group. That way, you have a sense of what the other group is talking about. And if you want to go explore it more on your own time, you can dive into their group voice thread and just check it out. I noticed that I had been hiding the weekly voice threads in Canvas so you guys can no longer access them after the week is over. I believe I unlocked all of those today. So as of today, you should be able to go in and view old voice threads as well as voice threads from other group if you just want to check out what they discussed or look at their materials. So if you can't do that, let me know and I'll go in and play with the settings in Canvas a little more, but I think we're good to go. Okay, so what did the groups talk about, right? So group one this past week had a great discussion about the role of familial support on health outcomes later in life for LGBT adolescents, right? And so it was a great discussion and one that I think is really interesting. I've done a little bit of work with Hatch Youth a few years ago where we published a few papers looking at the role of social support on health outcomes for those adolescents. And one of my former doctoral students, Sylvia Lawler, did her dissertation looking at some of the Hatch Youth data as well as some adolescent data we collected from TELUS Texas, and really looking at the role of social support on mental health outcomes. Sylvia's publications are forthcoming. The Hatch publications have already been out there if you want to look them up. The conversation took a really great turn, I thought, because one of the questions that Sarah posed to the group had to do with religion and are religious organizations a place in which interventions to increase social support could happen, right? And it was an interesting dialogue that happened within the group about that because certainly religious organizations have a history of stigmatizing, but then there are other organizations that have a history of being supportive. And so that created a rich discussion within the group. There was also a discussion about other places for interventions, including the role of healthcare providers to be a safe place for youth to have those conversations, and the role in which the school could be a place to facilitate conversations between parents and adolescents. So those are some of the conversations that happened in group one. Group two talked about barriers sexual and gender minorities face when accessing treatment for an alcohol use disorder. And the conversation there was equally as rich, right? And so some of the conversation in that group talked about how there is a need for tailored interventions for LGBT persons and the reasons why they might not access care, right? And it's really interesting because I'm on a project right now with the Montrose Center, and we're looking at the intersectionality of chemsex and treatment outcomes, primarily for MSM and trans women who, Black and Latino, I believe, is our demographic. But it's an interesting conversation because oftentimes, as you guys have probably heard before, sexual and gender minorities have poorer treatment outcomes, in part because these underlying issues are not discussed, because oftentimes when they go into treatment, there is a fear of disclosure. And so that was discussed by the group, this fear of disclosure and the stigma that folks sometimes feel when accessing treatment services. Also discussed in the group was the stigma that some physicians might have when talking to people about a substance use disorder. And so then you get into this conversation around intersectionality, around multiple stigmas that happen perhaps because of a sexual or gender minority identity, but also because of a substance use disorder. And so two reasons someone may not disclose or be fully truthful with a healthcare provider who's doing a screening. So that was an interesting conversation and a dialogue, which also there was a dialogue about the importance of intersectionality and not just considering someone's sexual and gender minority status, but also thinking about their substance use status, thinking about their gender, thinking about their race or ethnicity, and I would add to that thinking about their SES as well. Finally, this group had an interesting conversation about bi-erasure, which really linked back to the conversation that sometimes bi people are more likely to, quote, pass as straight or heterosexual when in treatment. But again, that's going to lead to poor health outcomes oftentimes because they're not being fully transparent and talking perhaps about some of the underlying issues that might be contributing to their social isolation and or reasons for using substances in the first place. So anyway, interesting dialogue there. So that was last week. I'll try to do a video like this each week just to kind of update you on what was discussed. This coming week, you've got 2 group discussions again. Group 1 is going to be talking about suicidality among adolescents, and Group 2 is going to be talking about trans non-inclusive healthcare. So both should be great conversations. One thing that I want to remind you guys of on the Canvas discussion board is under discussions, I started this thread called shared resources. And when I see something in the discussion board, I'm trying to capture it and pop it up here for you guys, just so you have a list of resources that you can add to your own web library, if you will, of just useful links and sources. If you find any that you want to share with the group, you can also share those by just hitting reply and posting it up here. All right, guys, that's all I got. You have a great day, and I'll see you on the discussion board.